All right, so once you've collected this information, what do you do next? So you should have a data set, and what you would want to do is you would want to obtain the averages, and then you would want to run a regression analysis with intentions as the dependent variable and the three factors, the three variables in the theory of planned behavior as the independent variables. And so what the averages tell you is how strongly, or the magnitude of each factor. So how strong are people's behavioral intentions? And again, this is just the entire sample. You might want to break it down, subdivide it by gender, by geographic location, whatever your main segmentation variables are. This tells you how high it is, and so you would compare it to the possible range. So the highest is a 21, this is a 15, so it's pretty high. A 50 out of 63 is pretty high as well, but a 5 out of 52 is pretty low, and so is an 11.9 or 12 out of 52. Those are pretty low, so these two are relatively low given the scale range. And then over here we have the standardized regression coefficients in this particular column. And so this is a multiple regression analysis, and you can use SPSS or SAS, R, you can use Excel to run a basic multiple regression analysis. And what you would look for is these standardized coefficients, because this gives you the weights. How much predictive ability does each of these have in terms of predicting intention? Subjective norms has the highest influence. Now, this particular sample or this particular set of results is taken from an article which is posted in Canvas, which has to do with predicting condom use among college students. And so it makes sense that subjective norms weighs the most heavily in this particular instance, because there are some, pretty strong social norms regarding condom use. And so here we see that perceived behavioral control is low relative to the scale, and so is subjective norm. So that these two are the most heavily weighed factors, the most influential factors. So we'd be particularly interested in their magnitude. So subjective norm, obviously a larger number would mean more positive social influence, but here it's pretty low. So that means people similar to the respondent wouldn't do it. People who the respondent cares about or are important to this person, wouldn't expect the person answering the survey to use condoms. So that is therefore lowering the magnitude of the subjective norm, which is then going to have a big impact because it's very influential in terms of the person's intentions. And then we can see here the intentions, again, for the entire group is a 15 out of 21. It's moderate. It could certainly be higher. And I'm sure if we broke this down into subgroups by gender, by age, we would notice some additional differences there. But this would be a basic interpretation of results. So we would say that these are the two most influential factors, and then when we look at their values, they could be higher, particularly even perceived behavioral control. The person has a very low score here. So this is something that needs adjusting in order to increase behavioral intentions. Because remember that as a general rule, the more positive the attitude, the stronger the positive subjective norm, and the greater the perceived behavioral control, the more likely the person is to form intentions to perform the behavior. And then each of those can have a different degree of influence depending on the group of people and the behavior itself. So in this case, attitude has the weakest influence, perceived behavioral control is stronger, subjective norms is the strongest. Now, what do we do with this interesting information? Well, we would then use those results and our interpretation of the results to develop our strategic recommendations. So the general recommendation would be, based on the interpretation we just discussed, that perceived behavioral control is influential and is currently low, so we need to increase perceived behavioral control via the marketing mix. We could say the same thing about subjective norms, that subjective norms are influential and is currently low, so we need to increase that via the marketing mix. It would be a judgment call as to which one you could influence most effectively using marketing tactics, so that could increase behavioral intention. And then we would need to take it one step further and propose and defend a specific strategic recommendation, so an actionable marketing mix tactic with measurable outcomes. And of course, the measurable outcome would be the change in either perceived behavioral control or subjective norm and intentions. And when we're talking about our marketing mix, of course, we're referring to the different promotion tools that there are, the product design itself, perhaps the product package could be changed, or the product itself could be made easier to use somehow. The place part of the marketing mix or distribution, perhaps these can be made more readily available, more strategic locations, and pricing as well could influence perceived behavioral control if the perceived behavioral control involves money. So perhaps the pricing, maybe that could be adjusted as well in some way. So those would be specific marketing mix tactics, and then of course we would provide our justification or our defending our rationale for why the specific tactic that we are proposing would have the influence that we're trying to have, in this case on perceived behavioral control and intentions, or on subjective norm and intentions. And that concludes this video on predicting consumers' behavioral intentions using the theory of planned behavior with the goal of developing marketing strategies that influence consumer intentions.